Hello everybody and welcome back. My name is Kari and today I am doing my October wrap-up. I did not read as many in September. In September I read 18. In October, however, I did manage to read 13, which means that I did not get all the way through my October TBR as you would have seen in my November wrap-up. That said though, I'm pretty happy with 13. It was a fairly busy month, filled with birthday parties and interviews and a fair amount of driving. Speaking of driving, when I drive long distances, like more than an hour, I listen to audiobooks because music gets very repetitive. This month I read Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince and Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. 5 out of 5 stars to both. Loved them. One interesting note about book 4 on the audiobooks, Jim Dale starts saying Voldemort with the T as opposed to Voldemort, which is apparently how you're supposed to pronounce it and how he pronounced it the first 3 or 4 books, and then for whatever reason changed. Either way, loved them, and now I desperately want to start reading them in physical copy again, but I have to give myself a little bit of a break. I also read Hamilton: A Revolution by Lin-Manuel Miranda. I would not recommend this on the audiobook. I think it was well done, the narrator was good pace, and the footnotes were read by Lin, but the problem that I had with it was that the footnotes were end notes. So they weren't at the end of each chapter, they were at the very end of the book and then went chapter by chapter, which is not particularly helpful to anybody because if you have to keep flipping back and forth in the physical book, in the audiobook you have no idea what they're talking about. So I listened just because I thought maybe someday I'll get the actual book and go flip through it, but that wasn't particularly helpful to me, so I think I gave that one a 3.5 out of 5. Alright, and then the physical books. I read Cinderella 6 Feet Under by Maya Chance. This is the second in a Victorian murder mystery series based on fairy tales. It is obviously based on Cinderella, being in the title, and it's set in Victorian era France with this woman who used to be a variety actress in New York, and then she meets this other woman somewhere in Europe who is looking for her mother. So Ophelia, the actress, and Prue, the other one, go looking for Prue's mother. In the process they find Prue's dead ringer, no pun intended there, lying dead, dressed as Cinderella, missing a shoe, in Prue's mother's garden. And so they decide, since the police are clearly incompetent, that they have to solve the crime. They do. It's very cheesy in some ways. It's an absolutely stereotypical murder mystery, but I highly enjoyed it, so I gave it 4 stars. I also read Oliver Twist by Charles Dickens. This one reminded me very much so of Bloody Jack by L.A. Myers, because it's set in the same sort of time period, Victorian era, but it's also very adventurous and following an orphan who goes on hard times, finds good times, hard times again. This book was about as good or bad as I expected it to be. I didn't expect to like it quite so much as I did though. I enjoyed watching everything come together, specifically at the end, and I enjoyed how it was sort of more of a mystery than you thought going into it. I would have liked to see a little bit more of, for example, Nancy or her friend in the street gang, but basically once you meet Nancy you focus on her whenever she's necessary and completely forget about the other woman, which seemed a little bit cruel to me. We're gonna introduce this character but you're never gonna see her again, at least not by name. So there was that, but I did enjoy the plot and the writing overall. Sticking with classics apparently, I also read Marco Polo by him. Technically it was dictated by him to some other Italian guy when Marco Polo was in prison back in Italy. One of these days, you know, when I have free time, I'm going to sit down and reread this book and plot out everything he says on a map, because I do find that very interesting. I learned a lot from this book about prejudices from the 13th century and innovations from the 13th century as well. It was a fascinating read and a very quick read as well, which surprised me. If you were interested in this time period, I highly recommend it because it's well worth the read. This will surprise nobody, even though it was not on my TBR. I also read Kingdom of Ash by Sarah J. Maas. I read this in 2 sittings, I guess, because I read the first 100 and then wasn't really into it, and so I sat down 3 days later to read the next 100 and just sort of got sucked in and read the entire rest of the thing in one night. That was not great for my sleep habits. but that's beside the point. This book is the completion of the Throne of Glass series following Lena Sardothian, who is an assassin in the first book, and then, oh boy, does the world blow up. This is a wonderful conclusion. There are problems with it, obviously. My biggest one was probably that it's so long, and yet the characters don't come together until like 3/4 of the way through the book, which makes sense considering where they all are, but at the same time it also just irritated me. Another smaller problem that I had was just that Sarah J. Maas's writing style is very much so fragments, and I like fragments when they're used purposely, but they seemed overdone in this book. That said, I still give this a 4.5 out of 5 because I liked how she ended it, mostly. At least I understood it. I also read The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid, which is a hugely hyped up book right now, and well worth the hype, may I just say. This is a book about a Cuban-American actress in the 1950s and on, who is telling her life story to a biracial reporter who is virtually unknown, named Monique. The reporter doesn't have a clue why Evelyn picked her, but she gets to take down everything that Evelyn says about her life, and specifically her 7 husbands, and move on. I loved how they discussed sexuality, and specifically bisexuality, and addressed a lot of the assumptions, such as if you are bisexual but you are in love with a woman, you must be gay, or any variation of that, and I liked how they addressed that. I also really enjoyed, and would have enjoyed more, seeing Evelyn's struggle with being Cuban American, especially in the Cold War, since we, after the Bay of Pigs, just kind of shut Cuba out. And so she refuses to speak Spanish for the longest time, and her wrestling with that, especially towards the end, was really interesting. I give this book a 5 out of 5 stars, and I cannot recommend it enough. I also read The Strange Case of the Alchemist's Daughter and European Travel for the Monstrous Gentlewoman by Theodora Goss. These follow Justine Frankenstein, Diana Hyde, Mary Jekyll, there we go, Beatrice Rappaccini, and Catherine Moreau. As in this book they meet and start to figure out what happened to Mary Jekyll's father, Dr. Jekyll, and in this book somebody gets kidnapped and they have to save them. That's all I'm gonna say. These books are fantastic. This one was a total cover buy without realizing it was the second one, so I bought this one and read this one. This is definitely a first book. I think I gave it 4 out of 5 stars because they do have to explain how they all met and all that fun stuff. However, I loved the way they do it. It's a story within a story, and sometimes a story within a story within a story, which is just highly entertaining to me and a very different way of telling these. And this one continued with an actual adventure where they're traveling Europe, and these women are just amazing. I love listening to them discuss each of their personality quirks and society at large in the 1890s. Give European Travel 4.5 or 5 stars. The penultimate book I read was Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass by Lewis Carroll. This is a Victorian classic again. This and Oliver Twist were the 2 that I knew I was going to get to for Victober. I did not get to Emma or Sense or Sensibility. Anyway, this is about Alice who dreams or actually goes down a rabbit hole and discovers a whole new world called Wonderland, and it's just weird, and I like the movies better. I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars because I think it's whimsical and fun, but it's not my favorite book. And the first one, which is the last one I'm going to talk about, is Born a Crime by Trevor Noah. I did an entire review on this one, so I will leave that linked below. My favorite part about this one was that I have read a lot of these laws and cases that he talks about, so I know what he's talking about legally, but I didn't associate it with a person necessarily. It was very cold hard law to me since it was in the law class, but I liked that he brought all of that home and made it real. It is very well written. My one problem was that I would have liked to have seen years at the top of chapters or mentioned when he changed timelines, because he did jump around a fair bit. However, it's very easy to read, it's funny, it's got some great lines, and I highly recommend it. I gave it a 5 out of 5. Those are the 13 books I read in October. Hopefully I will maintain this decent reading streak, but we'll see. That is all I have to say. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.